Hey guys, how's it going? My name's Nick Grant and we're here with Nick Grant and myself, and we're going to be doing an interview. So Nick, why did you decide to create a video on shooting an interview with a DSLR? So I think it's really important when you're doing an interview that you can't waste time, because the person that you're interviewing probably doesn't have too much time on their hands, which is why you want to make sure it's done and there can't be second goes. I mean, there can be second goes if they're down for it, but sometimes you can't at the end of it finish off and be like, oh, the audio wasn't working, the visuals weren't working, it was all out of focus. You can't do things like this because it's just bad video practice. So that's why today we're going to go through what you can do to make sure that these risks aren't going to be taken and to make sure that everything is going to be working properly, and any other tips and tricks to do with lighting, camera angles, and all that stuff. So we're going to get into that right now. So guys, what do you need to know? Firstly, angles. There's a thing called the 30-second rule, and no, it's nothing like the 5-second rule. So essentially, what this means is that every 30 seconds, something needs to happen in the video to keep it engaging. Now, of course, 30 seconds is the maximum, but you can do every 5 seconds, every 10 seconds, but 30 seconds maximum. So this means an image popping up on screen, a switch of angles, or maybe even some B-roll. What it does is it keeps viewers engaged. However, in an interview, you want to keep things clean, which means no pop-ups. So what you want to do is you could either use some B-roll if you have any, but sometimes you don't have that available. And what you do always have is angles. So, angles. So, with the camera angles, what you want to do is so you have the subjects here and here, and you want to either position the camera here, so you're getting both of the people in shot, or maybe even one over here. And this one is going to get a closer view of the subject, so a close up on their face. So then when they're talking, you're able to sort of switch cameras to this one, which means switching angles, and have a close up of them talking. Not too close, obviously, maybe sort of head to down here. And that's a good setup for a 2-camera setup. That's something that I would use. Now, on the other hand, if you have a 1-camera setup, you have 2 options. So you can get rid of these. So you can have this one here, as we talked about before, capture both people in one shot, easy, no editing. All you're doing is recording what's happening in the conversation. Or a little more advanced, and it takes a bit more practice, is just this one here. So the thing with this one is that when you're interviewing the person, your part is going to be cut out, because if you don't cut out your section of it, there's no camera facing you, only the subject. So when you're asking the question, they're going to be sitting there like, and that's not interesting. You don't want that in an interview, obviously. So what you want to do is, in the editing phase, cut your part out of it and make sure that they answer the question as well as asking the question, if that makes sense. So if you say, how did you get started playing basketball? You get them to say, well, I started basketball because blah, blah, blah. And that way you can cut out your part and just have them. All right, so now the camera settings. I highly recommend, if you can, and if it's in your realm of comfortableness, is to use manual focus. So with manual focus, you just set the camera up on tripods, and then you set it to manual focus, and then rack the focus in until they're in focus. The problem with autofocus is that if the camera loses sight of the face, it might start hunting for focus. And that's something that's really distracting, especially in an interview. If you're using a Nikon camera like this one, you have no choice and you've got to use manual, because when you set these to autofocus, what it's going to do is every 5 seconds, it's going to hunt for focus. It's something that all Nikons do, and it's just something you've got to deal with. So set that to manual focus. Like I said, you got to shoot within your realm. So if this is completely uncomfortable for you and you don't want to risk it because you don't really understand it, then set it to autofocus. But what you've got to make sure is that it's set to autofocus face tracking. The reason for this is because if you've got a camera set up like this one here, straight in the middle, and I move over to the side, now at the moment it's face tracking, so it's not going to change, but the center of the frame is the background, which means the camera will focus on the background. But if you're using autofocus face tracking, it's going to identify the two faces and it's going to focus on the faces. So make sure that's set if you're using autofocus. So now for the actual settings inside the camera, you want to use your highest resolution possible, obviously. Shoot at 25 frames a second, set your shutter speed to 1/50th of a second to maybe 1/80th of a second maximum, your f-stop to f5 minimum, and then you have control of your ISO and your lighting to control the brightness of the shot. And for everyone who doesn't know, the reason why we use the shutter speed 1/50th to 1/80th of a shot is because your shutter speed should always be around about double your frame rate. So because we're using 25 frames a second, you want to set your shutter speed to 50, and we can go up to 80 if we need to. If that makes sense. If it doesn't, hit me up on Instagram or in the comments and I'll try to explain it a bit more. Maybe we can organize like a chat so we can have a talk about it. It's up to you. Next thing, lenses. So their main camera, if you have it right in front of you, it's better with a wide lens. A wide lens, you get this wide field of view and you can get two subjects on either side of the frame. However, if you've got the secondary camera that's getting the single shot of the subject, you want to use a lens that will zoom in a bit. So I'd say probably a 50mm minimum, so that it can cut away everything around it, cut away you talking, and it's just the subject and the focus is only on the subject. And that's for the secondary camera. The main camera, you want it as wide as possible to get both subjects in the shot. Keep in mind that if you're using like a really, really wide lens, you might get some distortion around the edges. And I guess the only real thing you can do to avoid this is move the subjects in closer together. All right, I know this is a lot to tackle and I'm trying to keep this video short and just packed with information, just so you guys can take all that away from you without all the fluff. So the next thing is the lighting, so we'll tackle that. So if you have a one light, your best bet is to put this light right beside the camera, where mine is right now, or right behind the camera. Now, I don't mean to make this setup sound not amazing, because it is actually pretty effective and it does produce good results. Just having a light there, even just one, helps a lot. With a two light setup, it's a little bit better because you're able to put one light for each subject. So let me get this board for you again. All right, so two light setup, you'll have the subjects here, here, and the camera here. Now your two light setup will be one here facing this way towards this subject, and one light here facing this subject. Now this works if you have the camera over here even, just getting this shot, which was that other one camera setup that we talked about. But what this two light setup is doing is just making sure that each subject is lit individually across the side and getting that nice Rembrandt look. Okay, now it's time for the background, the backdrop, whatever you want to call it. So now at this point, you've got your camera set up, you've got your light set up, and now it's time for the background. So something that a lot of people do is that they put an interview with a blank background. So a wall, a brick wall, something really simple. And you don't want to do this, just straight up, you really don't want to do this because the video is already not that engaging. Aside from the content visually, it's not that engaging. So what I suggest and what I always do is make sure the background is interesting and has something to do with the subject. So if they're a real estate agent, maybe put their office in the background. So like film out front of the shop or in front of their office, something with a nice backdrop with something going on in it. You want to create that depth in it as well. So that means that the background is out of focus or the background is separated from the subject. Now, wherever you pick, you want to make sure that where you're filming, where the two subjects are at least 1 or 2 meters away from the background. The reason for this is because it creates depth, and that way you can separate the subjects from the background. And I honestly can't stress enough, do not put a blank background on. It's flat, it's boring, it's blank, it's just really, just do that for me, please. Now this part is really important. This is the positioning of the subjects. So let me explain this with the whiteboard again. You have the camera here, as usual. And this is going to be the symbol for a subject. And that's the way that they're facing, as you can see. We're going to make that the way that they're facing. You don't want this. You don't want the camera here and the two subjects facing each other. Yes, you want this to be a conversation, but you want the viewer to feel included in the conversation. And from this angle, even if you're going through here, you're going to get an angle that makes the viewer feel excluded. Not that they'll actually feel like, oh, I kind of feel excluded from this conversation, but more just subconsciously like, this doesn't look like a good shot, doesn't really click with me, don't feel drawn into it. So what you want to do is, I know it's slightly more unnatural, but do this. Have the subjects facing slightly towards the camera, but when they're talking, obviously have them looking at each other, but have them facing slightly towards the camera. All right, so now it's time for audio. Audio is the biggest part of an interview. Let me say it again, audio is the biggest part of an interview. That's where the content is coming from. There's nothing in the visuals, it's just the audio. The visuals are just there to help the audience engage in it. So make sure you're investing in good quality audio equipment. Even if you have to hire something out from somewhere, it's super important because you don't want to be wasting the person's time. So I'd say look up some videos, look up some good microphones. If you want my suggestion, I'd say either get the Rode Wireless Go with a lavalier microphone, or this is the Rode VideoMic Pro, and this one will clip right on top of the main camera and record audio straight into the video. Alternatively, the Rode Wireless Go, I've actually got this one on right now, and you clip it into the side of the camera, and then it has a receiver on top of the camera and a transmitter from here. This is the microphone here, and this is the one I'm using now. So at least you'll know that this quality is good, but so is this one. So that is how you film an interview on a DSLR, or maybe two, and some lights, and a good background. That's how you do it. So I'm gonna give you some tips that I found myself while filming interviews. This is outside of cameras now and like the setup, but come prepared. So it really helps to come with a killer intro for this subject that you're filming. Not only does it help you look prepared, it gives context to the viewer, but sometimes it even gives a bit of confidence to the person you're interviewing that you know what you're talking about, you know who they are, what they do, and that maybe you really like what they're doing. And so that's one. Number two is important. Tell the subject not to look at the cameras. It looks weird when you're here, the subject's here that's interviewing the person, and they're looking directly into the camera. In this occasion, it's all right. But in an interview, it's not okay because it really doesn't look nice at all. So don't do that. Tell them not to do that. Another thing that I found is some cameras have a record limit. So for example, this camera here has a 1 hour limit and then it cuts off. The Nikon camera, this one here, has a 20-minute limit. And this is a good thing to know because you don't want to be in an interview, get to a good part and then it just cuts out. Both cameras cut out. You want to know what that point is. What that point is where the camera is just going to cut out. For a Nikon, it actually tells you how long it's got to go. For a Sony camera, and I'm not sure about Canon, it doesn't tell you. it just gets to an hour and it cuts off. So what you want to do is maybe 5 minutes before it's about to cut off, when there's a dull or a low in the conversation and you're about to ask your next question, just say, hold up a second, let me just start recording, or stop recording and start recording, just to reset it, to make sure that you're not missing anything and you can cut that in the editing. I know this has been a really long video, but there's so much to cover when you're filming an interview. If you guys need any help with anything, comment down below and I'll help you with anything. Send me a request on Instagram and we'll get to you immediately, just to try to help you out. This has been Bling Productions. I'm Nick Grant, as I'm sure you know, and I'll see you guys next time.